Six Pack Lapadat. We got Eric Helms, Rory Lynch. Thought with all this outlier talk, and it's some high level, sophisticated talk between me and Rondell and Joey B. Okay, and I thought we
Hmm.
covered it. I thought we covered it completely and without questions. But it looks like we might have left some room for discussion. The man with a
Yeah.
PhD got in my DMs.
Well, I think there was one specific quote in your academic discussion with Joey B. It was a little later in the conversation, so some of the people who maybe are not the diehard fans of King of the Lifts, they might not have heard it. And I quote by Ryan Lapadat, "Fuck Eric Helms." And
What?
yeah,
No.
you
Was
literally
that
you said
Joey?
that.
Was that Joey B? Joey B said
No,
that.
it was no.
No.
Don't make me pull it up. Don't make me do it, Ryan. You were specifically saying, like, listen, we may not be talking about actual outliers, but this is about what you feel. And Joey was like, yeah. I mean, what we're talking about
Joey's
here
like,
is,
yeah.
yeah, it's like who is just the best of the best, the freaks of the freaks, and then you chimed up, you got excited, you're like, yeah, fuck Eric Allen.
No, that
Yeah,
doesn't sound like something I would say. That doesn't
I
sound
you
like
were
something I would say.
you were incensed, and I
Can I plead
here's the
insanity?
thing.
Temporary insanity.
I think you can plead temporary passion, and we all
Temporary
know
passion.
you. Like this is the guy. Am I wrong, Rory? Where in when he's commentating, you'll be watching that. I've been at Worlds. I've seen it, and there's a point where he's got to stand up. He can't sit down. You
No,
know,
no. That doesn't sound like
Sometimes
me.
the moment seizes you, right? Like even I'm commentating and I end up standing up at some point during the deadlifts. But yeah, at
Rory
some point,
listens to me commentate and he stood up 3 times. Okay. He stood up.
so I am neither offended, and I do actually completely understand because before I got into sports science, I was powerlifting. My first meet in '06. I mean, I'm the type of guy, I remember the first time I deadlifted 500 pounds. I screamed at the top of my lungs when I got it there. And I didn't just ride the bar down, I slammed it into the ground and it reverberated in my hand. I had a bruise on my hand for 3 months. So that's
Nice.
that's the inner Eric Helms. People kind of think of me as I'm, Captain Nerd Science. Let me just suck the soul out of all things fun related to lifting and just explain to you things about molecules. But no, 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 no.
getting real Dr. Bruce Banner vibes from that. Like we've got the PhD, we've got the rage monster inside. Like
That's right. That's right. That's right.
that's nowhere,
The
It's
rage monster.
all I'm saying is I understand the spirit of what you're talking about, the outlier conversation. Like who is at the bleeding edge? Who is leagues beyond what we even thought possible? It's an exciting time. The sport is growing. And I get it. It's hard to say like you can't have five outliers in the 93s kind of like vibes. And I think this one is just for us to maybe think about some interesting and cool and fun statistics that might surprise people.
Mm,
Because I think here's one thing I think we can all agree on is that with the rapid rise in the totals in powerlifting, um, we don't necessarily have a unified explanation for that. Is powerlifting so cool and popular that really, really good athletes are choosing to get into it? Or is powerlifting cool and popular so just a lot of people are getting into it? So we have more chances and probability of some really impressive athletes coming in. And then some basic statistical knowledge is okay, if one of those is true, it's going to do some interesting things to the likelihood of someone being considered an outlier, which might not be intuitive. So I think one of the reasons why there's some pushback against the idea of the standard kind of quote unquote outlier definition, and no, it's got to be higher than that. We can't have multiple people. It's because maybe we think what you need to be statistically to be an outlier is actually a low bar. But with the increase in powerlifting participation, the bar is actually going up. So the first thing I want to say, Ryan, is if you had to guess how much increase in popularity do you think there has been in powerlifting in, say, let's say the rise of the Raw era, somewhere in the last decade, from say 2011 or 2012? What are you thinking?
now, and we're talking obviously participation, people
Yeah.
participating.
Yes. So people, or like we could do it in terms of number of meets, or we can do it in terms of how many more people are participating in the sport. There's a few ways we can look at it, but there's some really cool data on this for sure.
I would say let's do, well, I would like to hear them all actually, but I would
Okay.
say, yeah, it's got to around 4 times as many people since the beginning.
Since we'll make it simple. Since 2009 till 2022, since I actually have those specific numbers, if you had to guess, um, in let's say a typical developed Western country where powerlifting has become more popular, what do you think maybe in say a Canada, Australia, New Zealand, US, UK, what do you think the number of either participants, meets, or competitions is increased by, whatever you think you makes sense in your brain.
It is a stitch different because the growth of one nation or other nations rising up is that throws a bit of a curveball. Overall participation globally is different because I think the sport has grown in for sure, grown in other nations. We've seen that. So frick, that's a tough one. Now you just threw a curveball, man. I'll throw something easy and just say doubled. But
Okay,
this is a guess. Like, did Canada
that's
double?
fine.
Frick, I don't know. But I'll just say doubled.
So there's some really good data that's come out of Australia, and I think as a English speaking country, like participation is going to reflect in some way, and because we follow the same social media, we have a lot of the same influencers to some degree. In 2009, there were around 500 total people competing in that year in powerlifting.
In
In
Australia,
2022, in Australia, not that
see,
many.
the thing is, wait, okay,
Hold on
this
though.
Australia's a weird one. But go on. Sorry.
Let him finish. Let him finish though, Ryan. Let him finish though.
2022, this is the rebound because there was a stark trajectory curve up till 2019. Then we saw a big drop because you couldn't participate in powerlifting meets during COVID to the same degree. And then it rebounded back up to 4,000 people in 2022.
So we have
And I will admit,
four.
Australia is has struggled with having a consistently represented, at least IPF federation, but they have had a lot of things going on in terms of some of the other federations. So that is an eightfold increase in the number of people, and there has only been a roughly sixfold increase in the number of competitions since 2011 to 2022.
Hmm.
So that means not only are there more competitions, but there's more people in each competition. So we are seeing, even in probably, I would say the one of the I would say lower growth rate countries in the English speaking world, if I had to guess, because of some of the IPF issues we've had with that federation, that continue, unfortunately, we've seen at least an eightfold increase in participation in the last decade, which I think should really tell people something. There are
Hmm.
many, 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 many more people powerlifting today than there were in just a very short time ago.
That is pretty cool. Yeah. And this is where we're going to get into um, rising to the top of a heap of such a much larger talent pool is much more difficult.
Yes. And this has echoes in each of the individual weight classes, and it's why there are some of the struggles we have with creating coefficients. So why have we changed from, say, Wilks to dots to GL points to all the various formulas that are out there? Is because there's not necessarily agreement on what that should look like, right? So in Olympic weightlifting, they use a different system a little bit as well. The Sinclair score, it's actually based upon recent performances over the last years in a given weight class, and it kind of does some normalization across weight classes. But here's the thing, there are far more people participating in the quote unquote middleweight categories. So one could certainly make an argument that if you are placing 10th in, say, the 93s, you might actually be a more impressive lifter than if you were placing, say, third or fifth in the 66s because you're competing against a much larger pool of individuals.
Hmm.
So the degree to which the coefficients take that into account can create what you might describe as a bias or not a bias. And some of the things with the Wilks score that people complained about is that they didn't feel it accurately represented as you got too high in weight. And that's, I think, one of the main things that DOTS changed. Don't quote me on that. Um, and I don't know enough about, say, the GL point system, but there is a lot of correcting factors for all these assumptions. And I think it's a fair argument that if you are a middleweight competitor, you're dealing with a larger number of people. So that means you can have, and I truly think this is true, if we could just handpick the 10 best 93s in the world and we put them in a competition, it would almost be interchangeable who was in that top eight. You know, we've seen
Hmm.
people all at that level. And I think that's a really good example. So that's something to consider as well, is that it's not just the increase in powerlifting which affects this, but also it is how does a weight class based sport impact this? So when you look at some of the data that's out there on this, when they extract, because this is a really cool thing you can do with open powerlifting, you can actually download that data and you can run statistical analyses on it. And there are several different analyses which I think are really, really interesting. There was one by Vandenhoek where they looked at all of the powerlifting results from 1968 all the way till 2022. Anyone who's 12 or older. So this is not just open class. Every single entry, every single total that they could extract when they had body weight, sex in the competition, and it was a raw total. And they were looking at what is the 10th to 90th percentile in each one of the weight classes. So when you look at the data in this study, if you look at the 59 kilo class and they break it down from that initial sample of like 800,000 powerlifters or entries, I should say, the 59 kilo class, they have 11,256 totals to pull from. But then the 66 kilo class goes up to 22,000. So it actually doubles just going from 59 to 66, letting you know how rare it is to have a power lifter who can fit into that weight class. And then when you go from 66 to 74, it goes up to 48,000, more than doubling
Holy.
again. And then when you get to 83, you're at 71,435. And when you get to 93, you're at 68,000. And then 105, you kind of start coming down the peak. You're down to 52, 120, 30,000, 120 plus, only 20,000 again. So you can see that in these quote unquote middleweight categories, your 83 and 93 on the men's side, you've just got 3 to 4 times to 2 times most of the other weight classes being represented. So you're going to have these really crazy battles. You're less likely to have dynasties, and what we might define as an outlier therefore changes, which I think is really important to note. And the women's side of it is also quite interesting because they're growing at a more rapid pace, right? They don't have quite the participation, but that's changing every year. Like we keep seeing that the records are only 1 or 2 years long. There was only 5,783 entries in the 47 kilo class. And there's some implications when you have that number of few lifters compared to, say, the most represented class among women. The 63 kilo class has 30,000. It's a six-fold difference in the number of participants you're actually looking at. And then one thing is that people have often complained that the female weight classes are probably not representative of the weight distribution across women because 84 plus is probably too early of a quote unquote super heavyweight category. Because in the 84s, there's 18,130 people. But in the 84 pluses, the entries from 68 all the way to 2022, there's 22,000. So it actually dips back up. And
Hmm.
that, I think, it tells you something like there's a lot of people who are tall who are women, you know, and there's a lot of people who are big, and that cutoff should probably be maybe a little bit further up. And so all of these factors go into to play and help us kind of get a better idea of the picture. So some of the talk about are there outliers, who is an outlier, and what is just a good performance are heavily skewed by the structure of the sport. And then I think most importantly, by our perception, which is filtered through social media. So social media, by definition, is going to select for the most cool things. They get reshared, clicked on, and liked. And I can't tell you how often these days I talk to people who are incredibly strong, who have a really, I would say, unrealistically negative view of how strong they are relative to other people because their entire feed is filled with people who are totaling truly elite level performances that we don't see that way anymore because we're thinking about a Gotta Sitco. We're thinking about Austin Perkins. We're thinking about Jesus Olivares. We're thinking about the battles between the elite of the elite of the elite. And we're potentially forgetting that while these performances are inspiring, they may not necessarily need to be a target or especially not a reference for what is quote unquote good. And elite sports, awesome. But in all sports, there should be levels, there should be hierarchies, and there should be goals that are based upon where are you and where can you go. And it means something to be, hey, I'm a novice level local competitor. I'm a junior in the local level. Hey, I'm trying to qualify for nationals. And I think it's good to be inspired by the elite, but an important part of keeping a healthy sporting culture and community is trying to acknowledge where you're at relative to your potential and where you can go and trying to reach as high as you can. And I think having things like regionals, nationals, juniors, age class categories, and understanding those differences is very important. And also just understanding like, hey, if you're competing in powerlifting but you just love strength, where are you at relative to other people? I mean, honestly, just being relative to yourself was ideally where I would love it to be, but let's be frank. Humans can't help but compare themselves to other people. That's why social media is popular. But I think if the average person was to guess what would be the 70th, 80th, or even 90th percentile among powerlifters across all weight, age categories, I think they would be shocked at the numbers compared to what are typically being seen on social media.
First off, it speaks volumes when you talk about how 83s in the middleweight classes, how hard it would be to have a dynasty due to the participation rate. And when you think about what that says about Russell Orhe,
Yes.
that's incredible. You think about that for a minute. We
Hmm.
saw one. It's still happening. He just reasserted himself as the number one. That's crazy.
It is. And I think we probably need to consider that I think Jesus Olivares is no doubt an outlier. But when you think about the number of people who can compete in the 120 class, 120 plus class, and what his total is relative to theirs, it is truly incredible. But it also means that he is quite the rarity. We got lucky that he emerged and was able to put up that total. When you think about the likelihood that it would occur relative to the likelihood of seeing several amazing outliers in other classes and what that is. Um, so if you want, Ryan, do you want me to talk a little bit about what an outlier is statistically in most
Let's
common
do that.
parlances?
Yeah, lay down the foundation. Then let's take a look at your numbers, and then we could look at different previous historical IPF World Championships and where they would actually have fall. And
Yes.
and they'll put in perspective history and what we have now. But yeah, let's lay the groundwork for sure.
Okay, cool. So I think the really important thing to remember is that outliers are based upon the current data. That means if we were to go back to 2015, some of those champions probably were outliers at that time, but it was at a time when the sport was not as developed, right? So when people talk about a normal distribution or a bell curve, that's when you kind of look at if we took all of given entries. So let's say we said had height, right? And we took the shortest people, the tallest people, and then the most average people. You'd see a bunch of people right around the mid 5 foot range among women and closer to say 5'9", 5'10" among men. And then you would see declining numbers as you got towards 4 feet tall on the far left and like 7 feet tall on the far right. So a normal distribution you requires a large enough sample, a large enough group of people. And then we can describe that data by saying, oh, we have a mean or an average, and then we have standard deviations, which is a measure of variance. And standard deviations are only a relevant way of talking about a normal distribution if it's actually normally distributed, right? So one standard deviation from the mean, it covers about 2/3 of that data in both directions. So if you are, you know, roughly 1/3 below normal or above normal, you're within one standard deviation. So you can technically have an extreme value, which is all that an outlier means, being under or above the mean by a whole lot. So you can be so weak that you're an outlier as well. I think that's one important
This is
thing. Now we're not gonna
and
we're
are
not
you
gonna
going to
point
name
that
them?
out and
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
this guy can't lift
Jesus,
the
Eric,
bar.
please. Yeah.
You're an outlier. Yeah.
That
This is
guy's
the
gonna listen to his podcast. We thank you, Eric Helms. You had to come on.
awesome. I
He's
was already
awesome.
feeling bad about my
Yeah.
45-pound
Tell
bench
tell
at
Rondell Hunt
93.
that. There's another fucking outlier he forgot about.
Yeah, we're gonna have an outlier only competition, and you have to be
Yeah.
extremely weak or extremely strong to compete.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but yeah, there's outliers in either direction. So, two standard deviations, you go out another similar value, that same standard deviation value at one more, and now you've covered 95% of that distribution, right? So about 47.5% on either side of that middle value, if I did my public math right. And then three standard deviations is like 99.7%. And there are many ways to statistically say something is quote unquote an outlier, and I will admit it is a subjective thing. But when you're dealing with normally distributed data, which we aren't always knowing for sure that we have in powerlifting, but we're getting closer and closer to it with higher numbers, because that's the way most things are distributed, especially when we're talking about humans and population distributions. It will be normally distributed if we have a large enough sample size. Three standard deviations above or below the mean is typically the one of the cutoffs that we use for being an outlier. Okay. There are other ways to do it. So that is what an outlier is, what it's based upon. And that means that any value above that is an outlier. And there are even more extreme outliers. You can have 3.5 standard deviations above the mean. You can have 4 standard deviations above the mean. That's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is percentiles, which is kind of like a ranking system. So if you took, all powerlifters and took their totals and you rank them from 1 to 100, there is a point where you're in the 90th percentile, which means you're better than 90% of powerlifters. There's 80, 70, 60, 50, all the way on down. So you can be in the 10th percentile, 20th percentile, 30th percentile. And importantly, this is relative to powerlifters. So those are two different ways of kind of looking at this data. And the cool thing is I've got percentiles for every weight class, for men and women, covering all lifts from 1968 to 2022. So it's kind of like this big picture historical lens. If anybody lifted and you're over the age of 12, how would you compare to the weight class to the weight classes across all eras? And then I also have the mean and standard deviation data for 2024 open lifters only, which is a much more impressive
Mm.
kind of average total. And we can compare three standard deviations to the current world records and some of the lifters that we've talked about. So, which way do you want to go first, Ryan? You want to talk about what is a good lifter based upon kind of all historical data percentiles, or you want to start talking about who is an outlier, who's three standard deviations above the mean or higher?
Yeah. Okay. Let's go into the outliers and then let's talk. Then we'll break off from there. Because let's clear this up and get that
All right,
sorted. Who are the outliers? And then let's double in and be let everybody know who's listening, because most people listening are going to fall within the second half of the conversation.
absolutely. Okay, so I sent both you gentlemen a cool, and also I want to give a big shout out to my PhD student Christian. Christian Amdi is part of the Danish powerlifting team. He's also doing his PhD specifically in that area of powerlifting out here in New Zealand. He's in the middle of doing data collection. Great guy. And one of the publications we're working on that's not part of his PhD is looking at historical trends and what is a meaningful change in total. And we looked through. That's why I have all this data. So big shout out to him. He put this together. He'll be someone in the future to potentially talk to if you want to talk more powerlifting science, Ryan. But with that shout out of the way, let's talk about where we're at with these weight classes. Okay. So, do you want to start on the men's side or the women's side?
Let's do ladies first. And do you
Okay.
think you go through weight class by weight class is a better reveal? Initially, we're talking about sharing it all at once, but maybe that's burying it, and maybe going by weight class is a little more revealing, if you know what I mean. Then we could share it afterwards. I don't know.
Well, here's what I can do to kind of show where I think things are most interesting. You want to talk about Agata Sitko?
Let's talk about Agatha Shinko.
We won't bury the lead.
Okay.
She is the only lifter who is damn near 4 standard deviations over the mean in the 69 kilo weight class with her most recent performance at Sheffield of 628. I cannot express how insane that is to be 4 standard deviations above the mean. in a what I would describe as one of the more middleweight classes among the women. This is, I think, the second highest populated weight class among the women. So for her to be 4 standard deviations above the mean in that weight class, it is a equivalent performance to something like a Wayne Gretzky, a LeBron James, a Michael Jordan, um, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, you name Muhammad Ali, your sports great. I think she is going to go down for a very long period of time as being untouchable, and I think she will last the test of time. That's my prediction, just based upon seeing that. The only other performance to that degree that I'm aware of is Jen Thompson's bench press, which was actually 4 standard deviations above the mean in the lowest weight class she competed in when she was benching close to 150 in the 63 kilo class, which, so was Agata, but then same thing on the other two lifts. So the 69 kilo weight class mean for 2024 open lifters is 351.5 kilos. So that is like the average performance among the open division powerlifter in 2024. That's strong, right? And that reflects how much the sport has grown. But there's a big standard deviation on that of 70 kilos, meaning you're kind of within the normal range. If you're anywhere from 280 to 420.
Crazy.
So,
Yeah,
yes,
honestly, I think people who are 280, if you're 69 kilo woman and you're 280, you're like, I'm trash. I'm no, you're right in the middle. You're in the pack.
absolutely. And I think that hopefully is a really sobering thing. The reason why that standard deviation is so big is because there's so many more people participating now, right? So there's the average strength in powerlifting has gone up a bit, don't get me wrong, but not tremendously in the open class. What's really gone up is just the sheer number of people. And then just by the sheer probability, the likelihood of getting these insane performances, it's an inevitability that we see someone like an Agata eventually emerge when we have a eightfold increase in participation at least, right? So if we were to go 3 standard deviations above the 69 kilo, 350-ish total, we're talking about a 563 total. So anyone in the 69 kilo class who is totaling 563 is on paper an outlier. So there's not just one. And then if we were to go 3.5 standard deviations, now we're just short of 600 kilos at 598.25. And then 4 standard deviations is 633.5, which, Gata on a good day, slightly different attempt selection, that's there. She's within 97 point, she's like 99% of a 4 standard deviation above the mean there, which she's the only one close to 4 standard deviations. There's a few other people who are actually at 3.5 standard deviations or close to it, and they are few and far between. So I think that's where I want to start is that Agata really is her. Like she is definitely her. And the level that she's at compared to her contemporaries is nuts. It is unfathomable in some ways, in my opinion. Because there are only 2 other women right now that I'm aware of who are actually at 3.5 or close to 3.5 standard deviations from the mean. And that is Carlina Tongotea with her 616. She's within like 97, 98% of 3.5 standard deviations above the 76 kilo class. And then, of course, there's Amanda Lawrence. She is an outlier, even though she's being caught by Agata, a weight class lower. I think the thing to remember is that doesn't mean that Amanda is not an outlier. It just means that Agata Sitko is Agata Sitko. Because the the mean total that would make you an average 84 kilo lifter right now is 386.5. But again, 71.5 kilo spread on that standard deviation. So that means if you're in the 310, 350 range, all the way up to say like the 450 range, you're a quote unquote average middle of the bell curve 84 kilo lifter. Now, Amanda has a 647 registered world record total, right? That's the current world record. She holds it. 3 standard deviations above the mean is 601. And there are almost no other 84 kilo lifters. There's a few in other weight classes who could do it who are totaling over 600. That makes sense, right? But she's 40, 50 kilos above the three standard deviation cutoff. And she's comfortably above the 3.5 standard deviation cutoff of 636.75. So the second most clear outlier we have after Agata is Amanda. And I think that's why it's exciting that they're starting to be compared and may even actually be in the same weight class at some point in the future to compete. So yeah, as I mentioned earlier, or last time we talked about a potential of Agata going up a weight class. I don't know that she's going to keep being able to milk that just based upon her frame. She's not as big of a person as Amanda, so when you go up a weight class, you're going to get some benefits, but at a certain point, as you're primarily adding body fat, it's probably not going to be as beneficial as what you could apparently do if you maintained muscle and lost body fat. So it'd be interesting to see what are the limits of where Agata can go and still be that dominant. But as it looks, if she wants anyone who's actually kind of on a relative strength level, even close to her, the only person in the same stratosphere is actually Amanda.
Okay, so before we go through the weight class by weight class, first off, this is phenomenal. Um, like what a crazy amount of information we're digesting. And we'll post for anyone listening, we're gonna post all this information for you guys to take a look at the spreadsheets as well. I'll post it on King of Lifts. But the only two ladies in the world who are 3.5 standard deviations is Agatha and Amanda. In
And
those,
Carlina's
that
close,
is
real close.
close,
Yeah.
but Agatha has already gone head to head with her and beat her. What I'm saying is like the only one who's actually officially is
Yes.
Agatha and Amanda. And those two ladies, that's why I keep saying they have to clash. There can only be one. There can only be one. And the fact that Agatha is almost four standard deviations, which would make her the only one, period, is
Yep.
you're 100%. She's absolutely special in ways that are too profound to find the words. And when people coming up being like, I want to be the next Agatha Shitko, it's like we might wait 1,000 years for another Agatha Shitko.
You're not wrong, Ryan. It is a truly mind-blowing performance. I will say one thing to keep in mind is that there are more lifters who are reaching outlier status among the women than there are on the men. And that probably indicates, considering there are slightly more women on the planet than men, that this could be driven by a difference in participation as well. When you get a fully quote unquote kind of filled out represented sport, you should see a little more of a homogeneity or a similarness between the men and women's side of the sport as far as how quickly world records are being broken, who is technically an outlier, how quickly does that change, how many people are extreme outliers, etc. Because when you look at the men's side, for example, there's actually technically no one who has even met or exceeded 3.5 standard deviations. Actually, really quickly, what's Rondell Hunt's best gym total?
Off the top of my head, I'm not sure, but he could do more than 1045 that he's done. He's aiming for 1,100 kilos, is what he said on the platform.
So if Rondell is able to clear 1088.1, and I say this because you guys had a long talk about
Yeah.
outliers, he would be the first male if he was able to go 1090. Or I mean, he can. It's gonna be all records, so he could hit 1089 if he wanted. If he hit 1089, he would currently be 3.5 standard deviations, and the only one who's actually cleared it over the 120 mean, which is
He,
shockingly low.
he
Yeah.
would be the only one. He'd be the first man, period, to be
Yes,
3.5, let alone for the
he would.
120. Like period. Rondell, if you're listening, Playboy, 120, period. You'd be the outlier of all outliers on the men's side if you could do this. And he thinks he can. He was shooting for more. And he's the one who
Joey B.
started all this.
Joey B, who carried on the conversation and also was the famously got to hear Ryan's amazing quote that I started this
Oh, I think
podcast
he
with
said
of
it. I think he might have been the one who said it, but let's put a pin in that.
I don't know. It sounded surprisingly Canadian, but it was whoever may have said that in that podcast. So Joey, if you're listening, in the 83 kilo class, 3.5 standard deviations over the current mean is 905.7. So if you went 906 you would also be the first male or the second male, depending on upon who does it first, either Rondell or you, to hit 3.5 standard deviations over their weight class's mean. So,
He can do
yeah,
it. We're gonna listen. Here's a prediction right now. I think both those guys do it. Both those guys become into who does it first. I don't know, but 2025 will see the first men to go 3.5 standard deviations.
yep,
I think an important note here is that to Eric's earlier point, this is based on current data, right? So if we see 2025 continued increase in popularity, continued participation in powerlifting, then those standard deviations get wider, right? And so based
yep,
on 2024 data, 906 would be an outlier. But by the end of
Mm,
2025, it might not be an outlier anymore, right? Like that's how the growth and affects this. And so like kind of interestingly, that means like if you want to stay outside the or right at the edges of the bell curve, you need to kind of keep pushing it.
yeah, you
hmm
know you're very right because 2025 at PA Nats, those fellas are gonna take that freaking bell curve for 83s and take it for a run. There's a lot of guys who are gonna be showing up. So you're right. And then again at Worlds, obviously.
yep. I think another thing that would surprise people is that if we use means and standard deviations, some weight classes are way far away from what would be three standard deviations above the mean. And this is, I think it's interesting and it's illustrative of a point, but we shouldn't take it too literally and we shouldn't necessarily take away from what these athletes have accomplished because what it probably means is that it's not actually normally distributed in these classes because there's not enough participants because very few people can be a 47 or a 52 or a 59 or even a 66 kilo lifter, right? So if we jump over to the women's 47 kilo class, current world record, Jessica Espinal 433.5. The mean performance is 285.0. That mean makes a lot of sense. It's only about 25 kilos less than the 52 one. But the standard deviation is probably high because there's people kind of all over the map. Because the standard deviation is meant to have a good representation of the full spread. So when you have a lot of non-normal distributed data, you're going to get some really large and some really small values that are going to inflate that standard deviation to some degree, showing its variability. So if we had more people enter the 47 kilo class, I suspect that standard deviation would come down. But right now, the standard deviation is 63 kilos, meaning that three standard deviations above the mean for the 47 kilo class is 474.6. So it's a full 10% higher than the world record. And this is, again, not to say that Jessica Espinal and anyone totaling over 400 kilos isn't a phenomenal lifter. It's just to say that it's very few humans who can be 47 kilos. And until we get a really big spike in participation, will we have a full understanding of what that class is capable of. But I suspect that the standard deviation will actually decrease, not increase, when that happens in this class. And we see similar things in some of the others. Like, I think it's really hard to claim that Evie hasn't done something phenomenal, considering how far above the rest of the field she is. But on paper, the standard deviation of 63 and the mean of 310.6 would mean that you actually have to total more than 10 times body weight of 531.1. And that is a higher three standard deviation value than when you get to 57 kilos. So the three standard deviations above the mean only works and only makes sense in the classes where we think we have an appropriate participation level so that we do have a normal distribution. And the mere fact that the outlier standard for the 52 kilo class is higher than the 57s probably means that this is not an appropriate metric for the end of the bell curve weight classes because it shouldn't be going up and then down like that. So I think it's
Mm.
probably right around the 57 kilo class through the 84 pluses in the women's side where we can accurately say if someone's an outlier. I don't think we have enough data if we're going to go by a three standard deviation metric to make any claims about the 52s or the 47s. So I want to make that clear when people do actually take a look at this data and start playing with it that I don't think it's fair to those lifters to use that data because their standard deviation should be probably smaller.
We could put some specific numbers on that as well. Like if we're looking at the 47 kilo class 2024 open, fewer than 400 lifters competed in that class in 2024. 52s, exactly 1,000 open 52s and all IPF affiliates 2024. Compare that to say 69, which I haven't actually checked, but it's probably one of the biggest classes, sitting like roughly in the middle of the bell curve. That's more like 4,000 lifters, right? So we're seeing, compared to the 47 kilo class, nearly 10 times as many participants. So like it's, to Eric's point, like we just probably need bigger participation there to be able to draw any sort of like meaningful conclusions from that.
Yep. And this is also reflected if we look at the historical data. If we look at all totals from 68 to 22 in drug tested raw women. Now, I mean, you said there was only 500, 47 kilo lifters last year who competed. We still only have 5,783 entries if we go all the way back to 1968, right?
Mm.
And a 90th percentile 47 kilo lifter historically, like if you just put up a total, is 308 or higher. So that tells me something as well. Like, we have some pretty impressive totals, but we still need more data to have a current idea. 52s, it does jump up a good bit. They have, say, closer to 14,000 lifters, and now the 90th percentile is like 336. So if you're totaling anything with a 3 in front of it, and you're a 47 or 52 kilo lifter, you're really freaking strong. But I think we just like Laura, not to keep repeating things, but there's a big difference between what is an outlier, what's really strong relative to average, and what can we know if we only look at a very small pool of lifters. So I think we're still seeing development in the women's class, which is exciting.
So let's walk through the weight classes then. Saying what the mean is, what 3 standard and what 3.5 standard and what 4 standard is. And let's agree, let's chop off 47s, 52s, what you already gave it anyways, but let's move up from there and we'll say, like, look at those, there's just not enough data, at least in 2024.
For sure. So for the 57s, we have the current world record held by Jad Jacob at just under 520 at 519.5. And she is very close to what is 3 standard deviations above the mean at 527. I suspect, given that this class is close to being representative of a normal distribution. I have not run like actual statistical tests to say that it's normal distribution, but I think it's worth saying that Jad is potentially an outlier. She's right there or real close to it. As we move up to the 63s, here's where I have a lot more confidence that these data are pretty representative.
One second, let's also give 3.5.
3.5. This is where it gets pretty bonkers. So the average in the 57s is a 330 with a 65.6 kilo standard deviation. So you're a quote unquote relatively normal lifter if you're in the mid 200s all the way up to close to 400 in the 57s. That's kind of middle of the bell curve, which is pretty wild. 3.5 standard deviations is almost 560 at 559.8, which would be an insane total to see, which would be pretty cool.
So keep going, actually. I'll give
Okay.
my thoughts afterwards. I'll pause on that.
Okay, cool. So 63 kilos. This is where we've seen some really tremendous battles through a handful of lifters, and I know that kind of from a feels perspective, we're thinking, only one of them can be an outlier. But it's important to remember that this is not the 1980s film Highlander. This is actually a statistical, calculation. So there can be more than one. You don't have to cut anyone's heads off with a sword.
Or there could be
Although,
none. Or there could be none.
It's true. There can only be none in some of these low weight classes at the moment. So yeah, the average, the mean total in the 63 kilo class, and here's another little hint why I do think potentially the 57, 52, and 47 kilo classes might need to develop a little bit more. There's only a 5 kilo difference in the mean at 57 versus 63, 330 versus 335, and a very similar standard deviation of 65 in the 57s and 67 in the 63s. So that would mean that in the 63s, if you're in the high 200s all the way up to, again, about 400, you are a average quote unquote lifter. So really similar numbers when you compare 57 to 63, which makes me think 57, maybe we shouldn't take uh, that outlier cutoff too literally. I think that class probably also needs to develop. The current world record is held by Carola Gara at 557.5, and she is 20 kilos above the three standard deviation cutoff of 536.8. So there are multiple 63 kilo lifters who are arguably outliers. And I think the 63 kilo class is either the first or second most representative class based upon numbers, because that is kind of your quote unquote middleweight class. So that would not surprise me at all as being a relatively robust thing. And we should expect in these middleweight classes for there to be multiple people who are outliers. And Ryan, I know you want to know what 3.5 is.
Yeah, that's
So if
what I.
someone was to be a mega lifter, they're not that far off. So 3.5 is 570. And I do think we could see somebody hit 570 at 63 for sure.
Without question.
Yeah, that's maybe a year away, is my guess.
So first off, I think Rondell's looking at this like 3.5. It looks like looking at these numbers. The numbers he threw out when we were talking, like 83 should be 900 and it's 905. 105 should be 1,000 kilos. It's 1,000 kilos. Um, 570 for 63 probably is around. I think Rondell, it's not totally crazy. I think he's just instead of three standard deviations, he's 3.5. And I bet you
Sure.
we talk this time next year, we'll have quite a few lifters joining that. Of course, to
But
Rory's point, it gets
yes,
tough because the whole bell curve swells. But
Especially because now we're putting these numbers into the universe, right? Some people are going to hear these numbers and go, not only that, not only am I just going to do a good total, I'm actually going to aim for specific numbers. And when people start aiming for specific numbers, and we see this in body weights as well, we see sort of like clusters at these numbers, right? We say, look, 1,028 kilograms for three standard deviations at 120. Suddenly 1,028 is the target, right?
yep.
Or 3.5. I forgot what the 3.5 number was. 1088. Suddenly that is the target, right? People are going to start shooting specifically for those numbers.
you once we say the mean, and then you say give or take like 83s, it's 564.1, give or take 97.6 on either side of that. People take 564.1, add 97.6, and say, I want to be on the other side of the mean. I want to be on the other above everyone else in the middle.
That's exactly
I'm
right.
not going to be
That's
Russell or
exactly
here,
right.
but I'm going to be on the other side of this mean. And that is, those will be goals for most people listening to be like, damn, okay, so I actually am special. I am on the other side of the bell curve. Um, and that's interesting.
Yeah.
Before we move on, are we naming names? Like, there's a number of outliers in the 63 class. Are we naming them?
Let's do it. Well, obviously, Leah Bavois, Megan Scanlon, the aforementioned Carola Gara, Alba Bolstrom. Freaking, that's off the top of my head. That's off the top of my head. I'm doing a trivia game now, but you probably already got it pulled up. So
I've
go.
got it in front of me. So Carola Gara, Leah Bavois, Megan Scanlon, Alba Bostrom, Chiara Bernardi, Sarah Naldi. And then a few people sort of like just under the cutoff as well. Celine Crum and Shah Jacob again, just under the cutoff.
Damn.
And that's the way it goes in these middleweight categories is that when you have a lot of people represented, you're going to have just a higher probability. And yeah, I understand that doesn't go with the spirit of what we're talking about an outlier. How can there be five outliers? But I think we just need to define our terms and know what we're talking about.
Would you say,
Yeah.
is it not appropriate to say, if you're going by 3.5, could you say there is no outliers, or could you say that? Or would you say, no, you have to?
As much as statistics is math, it's also very much describing what we see and talking in probabilities. So it's not like 2.2 equals 4. It's more of, well, what do we want to do with the data and how do we want to understand it? And three standard deviations above the mean is a subjective determination. It is an accepted subjective determination, but I will completely give someone the latitude if they want to set a higher standard for what we consider as an outlier. But I will say that you don't need to necessarily do that because, again, to Rory's point, as the sport develops, you're going to see these peaks continuing to go up. Someone starts chasing an outlier, and their very fact of chasing that outlier, once they hit the total, the mean is going to tick up a little bit. The standard
Yeah.
deviation is going to change a little bit, right? They're
Yeah.
making it
So it
harder on
become
themselves. Yeah.
yes, like everybody starts doing it. Everyone levels up. Yeah. Point made. All right. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Let's keep
So,
moving. Sorry, go
all
ahead.
right. No, no, no. So we already covered the 69s. This is Agata, being on a good day, 4 standard deviations above the mean. The threshold for 3 standard deviations above the mean for the 69 kilo class is 563. So we have again a bunch of people, and 3.5 standard deviations is 598.25. It's technically not just Agata. She is the outlier of outliers, but there are multiple other people in the 69 kilo class who would qualify. Rory, you want to name some names?
Yeah, so Agata, then we have Leah, Carolla, and Meg Scanlon again. Meg Scanlon actually misses by half a kilo. I'm gonna round up the extra half a kilo.
No, no, we're
Um,
getting tough now. Rondell wouldn't. I'll tell you that right now.
Rondell wouldn't. Okay, well, I'm not Rondell Hunt, so I'm gonna give Meg
Fair.
Scanlon the extra half a kilo. So yeah, Agata, Leah, Carolla, and Meg Scanlon again, and then
And then in
again
the
a couple more
76s, oops, sorry, go
underneath.
ahead.
Sorry, just a
Yeah,
couple more like less than 10 kilos underneath.
love it. And then we have the 76 kilo class. I already mentioned that Carlina is solidly ahead of the pack with her 616. The average is 373.8. Standard deviation is 72.8. So anywhere from roughly 300 to 450, you're like a solid power lifter. 3 standard deviations above the mean is 592.2. So we have fewer outliers here. You've got, Jessica Bittner just under that cusp. She's put up gym totals that could get her there, but hasn't put it together on the platform. We've got Carlina. We've of course got Agata. Is there anyone else I'm missing in the 76s, Rory?
No, no, that's it. Only two in the 76s. Oh, only two in the 76s.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Again, these are outliers. I think it goes to show that some of the standard calculations do pretty well in the well-populated classes. And then the 84s, this is where Amanda truly has had a dynasty that is, some people have said, oh no, she's just the holdover from that time and when we had all these really good lifters they should be in the Hall of Fame. No, 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 no. Amanda is, besides Agata, she is the most impressive female lifter out there, arguably, and she is well above not only 3 standard deviations, but comfortably above 3.5 standard deviations. And that is 601 and 636.75 respectively. And the mean and the standard deviation on this 84s is 386.5 and 71.5. So anywhere from the low 300s all the way to the mid to high 400s makes you an average 84. And there's just such a huge spread behind Amanda. I think has there been any 84s who total over 600?
Yes, yes. So Amanda, Agatha, but then following that, Daniela Mello at 613,
That's
from
right.
That's right.
Forgot about
2019.
her.
So like kind of years ahead of the game, to be honest. And then
Yes,
following,
that battle wasn't it? 2019 was a battle years ahead of the game.
I mean,
Oh,
that's
and I
still a
guarantee
highlight,
you,
right?
back in 2019, those outlier numbers would have been down 30 kilos at least.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's still a battle that we talk about today, right? Like 5 years on.
Hmm.
And then Ziana from British Powerlifting at exactly 600. So
That's
just
right.
1 kilo below the three standard deviations.
So
And
someone to keep an eye on.
so three yeah, 3 standard deviation 601, 3.5 is 636. And 4 standard deviation 672.5,
Yep. Yep. And
which
now we get to
um
give some props to Sonita because I think, like Jesus, Sonita is truly, and actually some of her contemporaries, there's a few people who have cleared this bar. So in the 84 pluses, the average is 403.1. And now we see a really big standard deviation because these are A, it's a larger mean because people are lifting heavier weights. But B, now we're getting into there being not quite as many people in that class. And that's 102.4 kilos. So anywhere from roughly 300 to 500, you're in the pack as an open lifter if you competed in 2024 as an 84 plus. 3 standard deviations above the mean is 710.3. So we've got a handful of lifters right clustering around there, but Sunita is well ahead at 731, and 3.5 standard deviations is 76.5. And if we ever did see the mythic 800 kilo total. Now we're approaching 4 standard deviations above the mean of 812.7. Although I do suspect with higher participation, that standard deviation would probably come down a little bit and that mean might go up a little bit if that would be my prediction for the 84 plus class.
So, off the hit, well, Roy will rattle it off, but we've had a few ladies hit 710.
Brittany
So we have a
Schlater.
few ladies in there. Bonica didn't make the cut, the old goat, but again, it gets harder and harder when the mean gets bigger. 761.5 being 3.5 standard deviations for 84 plus. Um, Call me crazy. Now, on her path to 800, I think Sunita can hit around there. Of course, the rest of the mean's going to move on her. So then that number's going to move up well. So it's more for everyone on this is your rate of adaptation and increase going to be quicker than the mean in the rest of the sport. That's what's going to be interesting. You got to
Yep.
keep pace.
Yeah, and we've seen just some amazing battles as the 84 plus class has developed, and we have several, outliers right there. So it's been really cool to see that happen because it was so dominated by Bonica. And to Bonica's credit, in her era, let's say 2 years ago, even 2022 or earlier, I bet you she would have been an outlier by a reasonably comfortable margin. And there just wasn't, the Alexis Jones, the Brittany Schlaters, they were not, they hadn't arrived yet to their full potential. So it's really cool to see that we do have some really amazing contenders there.
One thing Rondell did say then that Joey B said as well that is true. The outlier card doesn't last forever. And that's actually true, unless your name's I got the shit go. I got a feeling it's going to be a hot minute, at least in one of these weight class. If she gets pushed out of she's a outlier in so many already. But if she gets pushed out of all of them, I'd be shocked. It'd be a long time. But anyways, all right, let's flip into the men's. Or sorry, unless you have any other notes on the women's.
No, I would just agree that the outlier cards do expire on a variable date, but if I had to predict, Agata's might be a lifetime membership. So, at least her lifetime, I'll say that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
at least her life. That's right. She gets to die with that. Yeah.
Okay. So on the men's side, we do see fewer people approaching anything above 3 standard deviations, and no one, like I said, has actually technically hit the 3.5 standard deviation. Some have gotten very close, and I think we will potentially see some get hit. But we also see a similar pattern where in the lowest weight classes, I'm not necessarily convinced we have a sufficient sample to have a normal distribution. And the most obvious apparent way of looking at this is the 59 kilo class. I think we would all agree that, say, Sergey Fedosenko is so ahead of the pack. His numbers are so high that if he's not an outlier like in his weight class, then who would be? But when we look at the actual numbers, the mean performance in the 59 kilo class is 464.6 with a standard deviation of 86.2, which means that anywhere from the high 300s to the low to mid 500s your average. But that puts that 3 standard deviation outlier cutoff at 723.2. And I hate to be a pessimist, we're not going to see that for years, if at all. So I think that is an artifact of that being a non-normally distributed total. I think if you're cracking into the 600s, that is incredible. And if you're cracking into the mid sixes or the high sixes, that should be heavily respected. So again, this is where you really do need to have sufficient representation in a class to use the 3 standard deviation cutoff because it is assuming a normal distribution. And also, this is really interesting. The 66s, I think it is developing. And this is another example where we probably don't quite have a large enough sample because, again, we just had Chell blow out of the water what the expectations were on the class. We have the best in the world, like top three at Worlds, scrapping to get a 700-ish total. And Chell says, hey, how about 770 on a bad day, right? So if he's not an outlier, again, who is? But the actual outlier cutoff in the 66 kilo class is 785.1, which I think he will hit. But again, I think that's probably an inflated value based upon the participation in this class, where it has a
One
mean of
sec.
498. Go ahead. You
Okay,
go ahead.
what is the participation, Rory, of the 66s in 2024?
One moment, please. It's definitely bigger than the lighter women's classes, just because the men still have more people in general, though we see that sort of
This is where I
correcting.
got questions. This is where I got questions.
Like,
Yep.
sort of around about 2,000 lifters. It's 2,145. So like just a little over 2,000 lifters in the 66s open
And,
class 2024.
and how many people in the 76 kilo class women's 2024?
76 kilo class for women. Uh, about a pretty similar number, actually, about 2,200.
You know what I'm saying? I think that number's got to stick for the 66s. I hate to be a tough guy on Shell, but if he wants to,
Okay.
I'm just saying, if we're going to accept
That's fair.
one, and let's do this here and there, it helps qualify it for us, right? To
I
an
think that's
extent.
fair.
I'm a bit of a scientist myself. Okay, so
So I think
but
that's fair. And to Shell's credit, I do think he will hit
same. That's
785
why I'm saying
at
I
66.
actually, when I think about, because I think 785 is definitely there for him. And I know he listens to King Lifts. I know he's going to listen to this, and he's going to say, "Bet Euros is around." Well, he's going to be 74 for Euros, but anyways, he's going to look to establish himself as an outlier. But that's very interesting. What's
Mhm.
the 3.5 in this standard deviation? Because some people like Rondell don't give a shit about the 3 standard deviation. They want to hear what the 3.5 is.
That one might have to wait a while on that. Unless Austin wants to pull a Shell. That's 832.85. That's a big number. That's a big number for a 66 kilo lifter. I tell you what.
Yeah.
That would have
And
won IPF Worlds in the 93 kilo class in the pre-COVID era some years. So let's just
but however, Shell
Mhm.
at around 69 kilos bats around 825 in the gym. Will we see it in our lifetime? I think I would say yes. I would
Lifetime,
say
absolutely.
yeah.
Yes.
I honestly do. Now, of course, by the time that rolls around, it's all going to get moved up because the bell curve is going to swell, etc. Like we said before. But anyways, just throwing in perspective. Okay, sir, this I love this, by the way. I freaking love this conversation. Let's look at the 74s.
So the 74s, people should not be surprised. Austin Perkins is definitely an outlier. The mean is 537.9. The standard deviation is 98.2. So what that means is that, if you're into the high 400s all the way into I should say, sorry, the mid 400s all the way into the low 600s, you're in the bell curve. And the 3 standard deviation cutoff is 832.5, which Austin, on not necessarily his full potential, is more than 10 kilos over that. So he is definitely there. 3.5 standard deviations is 881.6. So I do anticipate that Austin, on a great day, when he puts it all together, is going to be closer to 3.5 than he is 3 standard deviations. I don't know if he will actually hit 880. That's a big number. I know he believes that to be the case, and I don't think it's not necessarily in his wheelhouse, but that's big weight for a 74 kilo lifter.
And so Taylor, let's name some people. Taylor didn't lift as obviously a 74 this year, but Taylor would have. I don't know whether lifter in 74s is hitting that, so we can pause right there. Just historically speaking, that's what it is. Let me
Yep.
ask you this: how many people lifted in the 74 kilo class in 2024 Open?
One moment. Uh, a lot. 25,000.
Yep.
So, so just giving more perspective
Sorry,
here.
sorry. No, I lied. That is all years. One moment. Let me try that again.
As he's looking that up, I will say, so
4,200.
Taylor
There we go.
has done 838 at a time when this number was a lot lower. So
Yeah.
Taylor truly is an outlier and a generational lifter, and he was incredibly far ahead of his of the pack at the time. And I would say relative to the competition at the time when Taylor was at his peak, he was even further ahead than Austin is currently. But that doesn't mean that Austin isn't even more impressive. It hasn't pushed the weight class further. It's just that the class is developing as a whole.
So Rory, how many people in 2024 in the Open were in the 74s?
4,200.
Okay,
So
it's a big number.
listen, the when you're in a more populated class, it gets tougher and tougher to get to 3.5.
It does. It gets tougher enough to
And
get to three.
so this is where the men's side, we have outliers. It's just to get to 3.5, some of these you have twice the participation rate as opposed to some of the women's classes, even in the middle. So it's going to get tougher and tougher for some. You have a guy like Perk who's like, my gosh, I'm not at 3.5, but that's, it is what it is. This is where we talk about talent pools and we look at
Hmm.
untested or we look at back in the day and how it's going to get harder and harder when the talent pools swell. But anyways, all right, let's go into the 83, sir.
Yeah, and that's why I'm so comfortable with three standard deviations as being considered an outlier. Because as you'll see in some of these weight classes, it's like, wow, the people we thought were way ahead of the pack are kind of right there. The 83s and the
Right.
93s, I think, are interesting because this is where we see multiple people clearing the bar and it won't sit well with you. But just remember, this is like the peak of the bell curve of weight class distribution.
Right before we move on to what you just said,
Mm.
would you then put a couple caveats in here and say, I'd be comfortable with three standard deviations if you hit a threshold of this many lifters inside that sample size? Like that's where I'm getting more comfortable. Like the 74s, if you're saying 4,000, maybe it's 4K. Maybe that's where we start knowing, okay, you got 4K, three standard deviations. You have less than 3K. I want to see 3.5 standard deviations. It might start coming down to that.
I
If
mean,
it
there are
if
actual
you
statistical tests we can do to figure out if the distribution is normal or not. I haven't actually done those tests. They're a little bit painful to do. So like just like I'm not going to be able to do them while we're sitting on this call or anything like that. Eyeballing it, it seems like when we're getting into the sort of 2 to 4,000 range, that's where it starts looking like it makes sense. But what I would actually want to do is I would want to go away and actually run those statistical tests and see which classes are actually normally distributed and which ones are not.
Yep, that's what it would technically require, Ryan, and it'll be a kind of a moving target. Um, and there probably is some threshold, but it will certainly be a soft threshold. And there are degrees of normally distributed as well. Like even when you do not to harp on statistics too much, but the decisions for whether or not a data set is normally distributed, sometimes they're based upon like whisker block plots. So is that an outlier or the shape of the curve, or is this p less than 0.05 or greater than it? And we use these arbitrary cutoffs in statistics, but if something is normally distributed because it didn't go less than 0.05, but it's 0.06 on a p-value versus 0.98. Those are two very different data sets, right? So anyway, I will stop talking about statistics and get back to
We
the
got to bring
numbers here.
Rondell on, is what you guys are saying. I
100%.
that's
Yeah.
that's all I heard. Is
He is the guy who decides. He's the decider. If Rondell says it's an outlier, it's an outlier. That's all we
so
need to know.
okay.
Delete SPSS and R off your computer. Just ask Rondell. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. All right.
All right.
83, sir. You're doing amazing.
83s. This is a very well-developed class. And this is one where we have a lot of confidence. Rory, do we know how many people competed in the 83s? I think this is probably the highest participation class if I had to guess.
It is historically, anyways.
2024. Yeah, I think when I last looked at it, 83 and 93 were approximately the same. So we had 6,300 in the 83s in 2024.
Yep. And when I was talking about the historical data, it'll be downshifted a little bit because people have generally gotten bigger in the last 60 years due to both good and bad factors, malnutrition, but also overnutrition. But it is what it is.
Overnutrition. That's such a
Yeah.
politically nice way of you're
Yeah.
overly nutrition, sir.
You have sufficient nourishment. Um, you are carrying additional calories. Yes.
That's right.
So
That's right.
83 kilo class, the average is 564.1, and it's got a standard deviation about 97.6. So basically, we're looking at anywhere from the mid 400s to the mid 600s. You are a pretty standard, lifter in that class, and that puts that three standard deviation cutoff at 856.9. So that means there's only a couple. Basically, we had the Sheffield cast, and we've got, Joey B, and I think that's about it. But Russell is comfortably with the world record of 870.5. a solid, 15-ish kilos above that cutoff. But there's several 83s who can very confidently claim they are an outlier. I would argue that's totally fine to have three standard deviations. And we do have some who are actually approaching that 3.5 standard deviation mark of 905. And I really think the future of this class and Adi and Joey is going to be really interesting because they're still developing. And I think they could both potentially really push the class forward, probably change these numbers, but at least based upon 2024, I would not put it past either one of them for totaling close to 900.
The only problem, the supporting cast is going to push that mean as well, unfortunately, and they are.
Mhm.
But yeah. And just I was an 83 and I would have ended up on the other side of the mean, on the plus side of the mean. I made it. I'm not a 3SD though. So
You and me both, brother. I can comfortably say I'm better than an average power lifter, but not much more than that. The saving grace, though, Ryan, is we could compare ourselves to the M1s if we wanted. So that
okay,
makes
well,
us appear much better. So,
that's a slap in the face, but let's go on the
well, I
93s.
slapped myself too, so that's okay. All right. So the 93s, kind of similar story, I imagine, in terms of the participation, Rory. I don't know if you have that up.
Just one moment. Do you want to start while I look it up?
Sure. So the 93s, this is right around a 600 total is kind of averages, 595.5, and it's got a standard deviation of 96.1. So essentially, if you're totaling anywhere from 500 to 700, you are relatively kind of middle bell curve 93 kilo performer. And that puts the three standard deviation mark. It's something that is typically what defines like a podium placing or even some winning sometimes of 883.8. It's only a few handful of lifters have broken the 900 barrier in the 93 kilo class. I think it was first done by Gavin Aiden, and then we saw two at the most recent Sheffield do it with the current world record held by Emil Krastev at 917.5, comfortably ahead of three standard deviations. And actually approaching that 931.85, 3.5 standard deviation cutoff. He's technically just, I think, slightly closer to 3.5 than three standard deviations, but pretty solidly between them. So there are numerous 93s who would qualify for this. It's really interesting to see where Jonathan Keiko will be with his comeback. He's not one to inflate his actual strength. He's very, sober when he talks about it, very good gauge of his own strength. And if anyone listened to the King of the Lift episode where he came on, he's healed up, he's coming back, and it's going to be really exciting to see what he puts up. There are a lot of 93s all clustering right around that three standard deviation cutoff. And I think they all are deserving of being considered outliers, considering they're, I mean, quite literally 300 kilos over the average performer in the 93 kilo class.
I mean, a couple things I'm noticing. Well, first off, let me double back for a second here. Austin with 851 almost qualified as an outlier in the 83s.
Yep.
And when Austin did that in 2022, I believe it was, he probably was. He would probably was an outlier in the 83s. And he was slightly over 74, but you catch my drift. Just to add a layer of how special Austin was, he would to be an outlier in two different weight classes is freaking insane. So if we're talking Taylor Atwood, and I'm sure if we went back to 2021, Taylor Atwood probably would have been an outlier in the 83s as well. I'm just spitball off my head. We haven't run the numbers, but all the numbers kept going down, down, down. So, anyways, very special there. Another thing I'm noticing for the 83s, for instance, you can be in the late 600s, mid 600s, and be in the mean, in the average, but you could also be in the late 400s. And the spread there, where somebody in the late 400s can look at someone in the late 600s and be like, hey, me and you, we're both average, huh? We're the same. The guy in the mid 600s would be like, my friend, you think me and you are the same. I am almost 200 kilos more than you on my total. And in your mind's eye, we're the same type of lifter. We should, we, we speak the same language. It's quite the spread though. I understand. There's a lot of participation, etc. It just does also, a lot of people are going to hear this and there'll be guys in the gym who show up on Monday who are like, hey, You thought you were better than me, but it turns out we're the same. And there's a 150 kilo spread between them, and they're in the same weight class.
Well, I think there are probably better ways of kind of delineating lifters as far as just generally, are you in the shape of the bell or are you out along the edges than that. And I think
Okay, okay.
if we want to, if you want, if you and your buddy want to compare each other, knowing that, come on, 95% of people are going to be within two standard deviations, then
Hmm.
we need to be a little more granular. I think that's where the percentiles are helpful. So again, if you're over the age of 12, and which is probably all the listeners, I would hope. And you want to go
God,
like, how
I
do I
hope
compare to
so.
all powerlifters except for the last couple years since 1968? If you're an 83 kilo lifter, you're in the 80th percentile if you're totaling 595. So if you're totaling 600 kilos in the 83 kilo class, you're stronger than the vast majority of powerlifters. Even
That's a,
though there are
in
people
your
in the
weight class.
83s who are approaching 900 in your weight class. Yes. 93 kilo class, similar thing, 635. So my best gym total puts me at the 80th percentile of 93s historically. When I look at that, I'm like, it doesn't compute for me because, like I've I've coached world champions in 93s. I'm nowhere near like how could I be better than 80% of 90 of 93s? But that's the reality. It's that these people are the tip of the spear doesn't describe it. There's the tip of the spear and then you look up 100 feet and that's where some of these people are.
I want
So
to ask Rondell if he's accepting your gym total, though. I don't.
that's fair. You know what? 620, best competition total. I'm not quite.
Okay.
I'm in like the 78th percentile historically. How about that?
Okay, okay.
Neither
That's
one
fair.
is going to get any bragging rights on King of the Lift, so who cares,
You
right?
know, Rondell's like,
Yeah.
okay, fine, I'll let it go then. 78. That's fine.
Yeah. I mean, Rondell is probably equally impressed by that as the fact that I briefly held the M1 83 and 93 kilo Auckland bench press record. So let's go
All
for at
right.
least like 3 months before the next competition happened. All right. So,
Okay.
yeah, no one cares about what I have to say except about statistics. My lifts matter not. Um, 105s. 105s, we see a jump up in the mean to 636.9, and we see a jump up in the standard deviation to over 100 kilos, 103.9. And this is where the current world record is actually not at three standard deviations above the mean. So Anatoly Novopispani, 940.5, but three standard deviations over the mean is 948.6. And
But what
3.5 is 1,000 kilos.
but okay, a caveat there.
Hmm.
Um, what is the highest total, not world record, but what is the highest total we've seen at 105? Rory's gonna pull it up. Ash, so,
950.5.
sorry?
It is 950.5. So the best total at 105
That's
is
Ashton.
over the three standard deviations. That's Ashton, but it was a domestic meet, so it is not the world record.
Right. And I thought Ash was hit more, but was he slightly over 105 when he did? Hang on a second.
I
Is
think
that
he
just
did it at 110.
2024?
I don't believe Ashton has done more than that.
No, he's done more than 950. Hang on a second.
We
No,
can check his
according to
open
Open
powerlifting.
Powerlifting, he hasn't.
Yeah.
Not according to Open IPF, he hasn't. Sorry.
Yeah. I
I knew
think
it.
he has in the USAPL. I could be wrong.
Yeah, he
But
has.
I know we
So
got you
Ash,
looking up all kinds of crazy stuff, Rory, but it would be good to discuss how many competed in 2024 in the 83 versus the 93 and the 105s, kind of those weight classes to give people an idea.
under
Okay,
one
so
105. Sorry, go ahead, Rory.
So 105 2024, was that what you were asking? 93s was a little bit over 6,300.
Okay.
105s is 4,500. So starting to drop off the other side again. And then 83s, I looked that up just a moment ago, and it was around the sort of mid 4,000 mark as well. So sort of 93s about a
Really?
little over 6,000, 83s, 105s a little over 4,000 each.
And
So the
Ashton,
actual peak of the bell curve is in the 93 kilo class in the modern era, even though it
that's
was,
crazy.
yeah. So
It
if we
used
were
to be a
if we
little
were to
bit
take
lighter, yeah.
Yeah, if we took all historical data, it's actually downshifted to the 83s. So there's 93s. It is that we have that perception. Like, why is it such a bloodbath? Why is there so many killers? It's because there's so many people.
Mm. And it's harder to break through the pack. Um, Ashton under 105. has done 960.5, just giving a little color to your stat there. So we do have an outlier.
Hmm.
And also he's done 968 at 105.8. But anyways, he established himself legitimately as an outlier. And I wouldn't be shocked if I would have to take a look at Bob if he ever weighed underneath off the top of my dome, obviously at 105 in change at Worlds this year. He put up freaking something crazy. Like obviously he would establish himself as an outlier too if he shedded less than a kilo. So, anyways,
Yep.
105, although per the world record, no, but per what we know, not at Worlds, yes. But also a caveat, 1,000 kilos, this was, which is 3.5 standard deviations, actually the number people have tossed out saying they expect from 105s. Now, having said that, like Keenan Lee and Bob and a lot of these fellas, but Ashton says he could do 1,000. But like we've already said, by the time they get there,
Mm.
the rest of the community is not standing still. The bell curve also moves, and 1,000 kilos may or may not. You might need 1,005. You might
Yep.
need just a little bit more. So you hear this, you hear 1,000. You better put on a couple more kilos by the time you get there, unless you're doing this real quick. PA Nats is in a few weeks. That might do it. Although PA Nats itself might change this bell curve, but with those people around. But anyways,
Look, that's still a substantial jump that we're talking about, though, right? Like people are talking about 1,000 kilos, like we're right on the cusp of hitting it at 105. But like even taking Ashton's non-IPF total at, did you say 960.5? Is that what you said?
968 was his biggest. Yeah.
Okay, 960, even taking the 968, that's still more than 30 kilos away. And that's, if I remember correctly, that was actually a little while ago, wasn't it? So that was like more than 18 months ago. And his total has not reflected that since. Like, are we going to see 1,000 in my lifetime? Yeah, I think so. But like, I don't think we're going to see it in the next, like in the imminent weeks and months. That's still a decent way away. Versus before we were talking about Agata hitting 633.5. That's 5 kilograms away. That's the difference
Yeah,
of
yeah.
missing one bench attempt or not, right? Like that's actually right there.
And that's four standard deviations, not
And
three
that's
and a
and that's
half.
4 standard deviations. Yeah. Here
Yeah.
we're talking
No,
about more than 30 kilos.
I get to laughs at history. It's freaking crazy. Just to give, okay, so Bob Matthews at 105.9 in Lithuania at Worlds did 970, and at
Yep.
106.2, which is obviously a water cut away from 105, did 978.5. But to your point, Rory, we're still over 20 kilos away from 1,000 kilos, and we all think Bob's amazing. So and he's winning weight classes a weight class up. So that's how hard 1,000 kilos at 105 is when you got like exactly he's still 20 kilos away, and that's as special as Bob's as special as it gets. So yeah, it's huge. By the
It
time we see
is.
1,000 kilos fall, it probably no longer is 3.5 standard deviations away.
Yep.
Good point.
So
All
yeah,
right.
it's
Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, the 120s, these are when we start to get some pretty big standard deviations and a pretty big mean. And we see now we're definitely coming down that hill to um, perhaps the 120 class. It's an interesting thing when you compare the weight class right underneath the supers to the weight class to the supers themselves, because there's a big spread in the plus. There's not a lot of people who are over 120, but if 120 goes all the way up to 200, it's a much larger spread than the 15 kilo difference between 120 and 105. So, Rory, do you know how many people were in 2024 in the 120 kilo class?
2,300. So that was roughly the same as the 74 kilo class that we were looking at just before.
Yep. So we're kind of just on the cusp of what we would consider a valid, assessment. And this is where I think the world record, just because of, you know, for something to be a world record, it has to be done at the right meet. The world record is a little lower than probably the lowest compared to the three standard deviation cutoff on the men's side. So we have a mean of 670.9, a standard deviation of 119.2, and then we have Dennis Cornelius currently holding the world record at 978.5 in the 120 class, and three standard deviations. The outlier cutoff would be 1028.5. So that is a total that there are definitely some people who can do in the
Who have
120
done.
class.
who have.
Yes.
Rondell hit
Yes.
10:45 under
Yes.
120. So even though he's in the 125 class, he purposely weighed in under 120. So Rondell, if you're listening, okay, yes, first off, you're an outlier. And 3.5, we already said this, but it bears repeating 3.5 for you, sir. 1088.
Yep.
Well, point 0.1. So you're going to want to do 1089. But of course, it might move a little. But again, he's
And you can
lifting at
compare
a
to last
powerlifting.
year, you know?
Yeah, 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 yeah. Anyways, he's right there. If he hits, we'll see.
Yeah, and I think that's just one thing to point out if we do end up, sharing this specific spreadsheet is that the world records are not necessarily representative of the best total that has been done across all meets. So you can, shift whatever you think is a fair comparison to where you want, but those are good reference numbers at the very least.
For sure.
So, Rory, how many do we have in the 120 plus? If we had just over 2,000, you said 2,400 in the 120s?
Yes, 120 plus, open only 2024, 1,100. So comparable to the 52s that we were talking about before, and that we definitely didn't think was sort of like an appropriate sample size.
That's
Yeah.
right. So holy smokes, what does this mean?
Well, here's the thing. When you don't have a normally distributed data set, it can shift things maybe too high or too low. It's hard to say. But I think just given the spread that Jesus has on everyone else, he is approaching, he's closer to the 3.5 than the three standard deviation cutoff. So the
Hmm.
mean performance in the 120 plus is 706.3 with a pretty damn big standard deviation as these are bigger numbers and also it's a more variable class because it's fewer people, probably not normally distributed, 135.8. So that would put the three standard deviation cutoff at 1113.7 and 3.5 standard deviations at 1181.6. So he's done 1152.5 in the very first Sheffield, which was incredible to see in person,
Hmm.
as you know, Ryan. So, like, I definitely think even though we probably don't have an accurate three standard deviation um, threshold, the significance of what Jesus has done, totaling more than people in wraps on anabolic steroids should, I mean, probably. They're at least not, they're the untested division. I'll just say that to be politically correct. I think we need to really give Jesus his flowers here. So again, it kind of falls off once we're starting to look at the ends of both sides of the weight classes, at least on the men's side. I know I think, more relative participation in the 84 pluses. Actually, that might be an interesting comparison, Rory, while Ryan, talks about what he thinks here. But how many 84 plus
Okay, go ahead.
versus 120 plus competitors were there in 2024?
Just under 8,084 plus and about 11,000 120 plus. I don't have the total participation numbers for men and women easily available though, so that will sort of relative participation numbers will take a second.
Okay, and that's not that's more than just 2024. That's like all time.
That's
Yeah,
all.
no.
That was all years, yes. So
Okay,
2024 only was 1,400. Actually, more, absolutely more.
interesting. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So 1400. That was the 84 pluses.
1,400, 84 plus, 1,100, 120 plus.
Yeah. See, that's another really good example. We know there are more men in the sport than women, but the fact that there's more 84 pluses than 120 pluses is, I would say, even more evidence that we potentially need to have another women's weight class or just shift up
Right.
the the higher weight class because
The thing,
I
yeah.
think yeah.
You look at stats. What numbers don't lie. And if you're also interested, so first off, I think 100% you're right. Jesus Oliveras is the strongest powerlifter that ever lived, tested or untested. So he has to be an outlier. If
Right.
he's not, what the heck are we talking about? So he is. But interesting enough, Ray Williams' best ever total is 1112.5, and he
It's right
misses
there.
the cutoff by 1 kilo.
Well, here's the thing.
Ray
Ray Williams
Williams
did that.
is
He did that 11, 12.5 a few years back though. So he would have definitely been an outlier, I think, when he did that total.
Rondell would tell you, and he's the one. He's the authority on this.
Well, Rondell would say
You
his
don't get
card
to,
expired in
its
2024.
card
So
expired, sir.
yeah.
Yeah, so he would look back. I don't know, man. This is crazy. This is
I mean,
crazy to say.
this is the kind of stuff that when we're talking about sports that are sort of like a little more mature than powerlifting, why if we're looking about like a Hall of Fame or something, we have like historic wings and stuff, right? Like
Yeah.
some of these performances that were revolutionary, groundbreaking in 2019, and of course going back further, less notable today, but still worth recognizing their significance at the time. Right. We
Yeah.
could take specific examples. Like I remember watching the 303 kilo world record squat in like 2016 or something at 93. Incredible at the time. Now there's like 10 guys who squat more than that. But at the time, super cool.
You just broke
Babe
Lane
Ruth
Norton's
would get
heart.
Babe Ruth would get lit up in today's era. It is, but he's a legend, and you needed Babe to grow the sport and get us where we are now.
Well, on that note, Ryan, that's why it's cool to have history and statistics because you can see also the historical performances that would still be impressive today.
Right.
Um, and so, for example, God, this probably makes both of us feel old, Ryan, but Michael Jordan in the late 80s and early 90s, and granted, the game has changed a lot, the way defense is played, the way offense is played. His stats then, they rival people of the best now 30 years later, 40 years later. So I think that's why it's also helpful to have some of these because you can see, yeah, we knew they were amazing then. We knew they were the GOAT then, but how long does that persist to give us an idea? And if you're good enough, your legend and your stature grows with time. And I think Agata is going to be an example, probably, of one of those people who in 2050, you're like, my God, was she ahead of the game? That would be my prediction. It's tough to say. We don't know how much the sport's going to grow, but it's a really interesting thing to look from that lens as well. So yeah, it will be really cool to see who is still getting talked about in this phase of rapid growth, if they can survive the massive participation. Because I hate to say it, we're just not talking about who won IPF World in the Open divisions in 2017, and it doesn't take anything away from that accomplishment. But I think they do mean different things when we kind of compare it relative to the field and an emerging sport.
This is okay. So a few things that this is what Rondell initially said on the first podcast when he came on. It's not the first one he ever came on, but the first time we started talking about outliers. And he was saying, when we talk about like all-time greats and goats, we talk about titles won, the significance of winning a title pre-COVID era and post-COVID era, et cetera. It can't mean the same. The participation rates and where we at and what made you an outlier, what number made you an outlier back then, and what makes you an outlier now, it's a whole nother ball game. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's very difficult to compare all these like different eras. And that's why, and it
Yeah.
doesn't take away because if those people didn't come around and popularize the sport and be who they were, we wouldn't be here. But you're right. When you look at the field we have, it is so hard to break away from the pack.
Yep.
Close. We have some on the men's side who are close to 3.5, and we got a few on the women's side who have hit that. And then standing alone seems to be the Michael Jordan of our era. I got the shit go. And she's a
100%.
junior. She's a junior, fellas.
People
If
forget
you
that. If she stays injury free, I mean, it's hard to predict where she's going to land.
that's why when I was talking her into win three titles in three weight classes and win three Sheffields back to back to back to back, and you'll still only be 24. And it's like, and then we'll look at all your freaking stupid standard deviation. You'll be like 17 standard deviations away from everybody else. And it's like, all right, okay. I don't know. You won the game. I don't know. You got to start deadlifting with one hand now to make it interesting. I don't know. It's crazy. I hope she's listening to this. It's so wild from when like we first met her. I remember when I first
Mm.
had her on the podcast, she was like 12, man. Like she was a teenager battling Jessica Bittner. It was life and death. And Jessica Bittner's Jessica Bittner. She pulled the greatest deadlift of all time at the time to beat her. And it God. But anyways.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because, to the people who are competing for the top spot, um, they are fundamentally looking at the sport in a different way to how the powerlifters participating at all other levels are, where they're kind of trying to level up. It's about self-improvement. It's about being the best version of themselves they can, and then seeing where does that place me, rather than I need to be on the podium. And I've kind of what elite sport is fundamentally different to that, and that's okay. And I think we need to give some love to both sides of it. Something I really like about percentiles, Ryan, is that even when you're talking about the 90th percentile, it's very far from outliers. Because outliers are way beyond that. We're talking about the best of the best, and they're way more than the top 10%. We're talking about less than the top 1% in some cases here. But to think about what it really means to be better than 90% of everyone who has participated in the sport of powerlifting since 1968, that really does mean something. And it means you're
Mm.
really freaking strong. And I think not enough people give themselves the respect for what they've accomplished and what these numbers mean and what truly is strong. It's one of the things I'm very grateful for having been a personal trainer for years, for being a powerlifting coach for years. Like, no one wants to talk about my athletes who are not world champions. Like, yes, I've worked with three world champions. Like, yes, I've worked with many national champions. Yes, I've coached at the international level, but I've coached tens, and I know Rory has. I know many. Just being involved in the sport, who are really freaking strong, and compared to everyone in their day-to-day lives, and even the friends of their friends, they're unfathomably strong to the average population. And I also get to see this as a researcher because when we, recruit, say, untrained or even quote unquote trained participants, and we have them, test their back squat or test their bench press, the number of people who can deadlift even two times their body weight in research is like handfuls out of the thousands of studies we've done, even on trained individuals. So I think it might be helpful just to give some ideas to people of what does it mean to be like the 90th percentile historically across all powerlifting performances. And I think it would shock people. So let's talk 59 kilo class men. The 90th percentile total is 480. So yeah, we're talking about these greats who are trying to get into the high 600s, but literally 200 kilos lower than Sergey Fedosenko, and you're better than 9 out of 10 powerlifters who have ever competed in that class since going all
Crazy.
the way back to the 60s, right? And you see similar things. If we talk 90th percentile in the 66 kilo class, it's 535. 90th percentile in the 74 kilo class, where we're shocked by Austin Perkins, is 587.5. If you've hit 600 in the 74 kilo class, you are an incredible lifter, right? But I think we see it as like if you haven't hit 700, like you shouldn't even be posting. Like, come on, 83 kilo class, 635. 93 kilo class, yeah, 635. And the 83, you were there historically. Again, everyone 12 and over. Ryan, you were better than 90% of powerlifters. And I think we just lose sight of these things.
It's a couple
Like
13-year-olds.
squatting over 500 pounds, deadlifting
I'll
over
rub it.
600 pounds. This is a big
I'll rub
deal.
it right in those 13-year-old faces, man. Okay,
You
keep
take
going.
it, bro. Yeah, we'll make people feel even better. So, 93 kilo class, 677.5. You're in the 90th percentile historically, if we're looking all the way up to 2022 from 1968. And you don't even hit 700 until the 105s and 717.5. So that's why I remember when we had the 84 pluses hitting 700 kilos. I remember I was talking to Matt Gary. I was like, I don't care who you are. If you total 700 kilos, you're just strong. It's insane. Many people, no matter what they did with their nutrition, their training, anabolic steroids, you do whatever the hell you want. If someone said, "Hey, I have unlimited time, I'm not going to get hurt, and I could do anything that's available on this planet," and I had a genetic roll of the dice, and I don't know what they are, I just know that this is some person talking on the internet, I'm betting against them that they're ever going to total 700. Because if that's how
Hmm.
rare that is, I don't care how much you weigh. Like if I'm thinking 9 out of 10 chance, you take all the anabolic steroids you want in the world. You're not hitting a 700 total. I'll bet some money on that. It's a good bet on my end. But because of social media, because of what we see at the top, we think, oh man, like there's a lot of people there. You go to any gym in the U.S. There's got to be 3 people squatting 600 pounds any minute. Like absolutely not. We are really truly looking at some of these outlier performances. Um, in the 120 class, 755 historically is 90th percentile. And it's not until you hit the 120 plus where you get over 800. And 810 total makes you in the 120 plus class historically better than 90% of powerlifters on the men's side.
So if you made it instead of 12 and up, 18 and up, would that skew it if you take out all like
It would push
make
it
it a
up
lot
for sure.
harder?
It would push it up. If we went only open, these numbers would probably jump somewhere between like 30 to 60 kilos per class with higher numbers as you went up in weight class. But
I've
just in the
worked.
interest of, the juniors listening and the M1s listening and everybody, I thought it would be helpful to get this data set of just all powerlifters.
Mm, 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 mm.
Yeah.
Interesting, man. It's interesting. It's interesting to look at numbers and you know what I'm proposed to you, gentlemen, is that we reconvene after Worlds who the outliers are because we're going to see performances this weekend coming up at Euros, PA Nats, and then we're going to see Worlds. And we could do a little look back at Worlds after Worlds. Let's take a look who's joined just for the outliers. Who has joined 3.5? Who's still a 3 if those numbers have moved significantly? And they might have. And then I also propose at the end of the year, when we look back at 2025, let's say, welcome to being an outlier, so and so. And let's also say, you have lost your outlier pass. No, I don't know if we'll go forward. You're a has been. And we start pointing people out. That's going to be tough. But,
Statistically, you're a has been.
right. The has been
2.99
award
standard
breaks out.
deviations, you are trash. Yeah.
You are
Yeah.
garbage. And you, but,
So I actually find these conversations really like reassuring and motivating in a lot of ways, because like it's can sometimes feel like you're getting absolutely drowned out when you're sort of like not an outlier, right? And so I'm like you, Eric. I'm sort of floating around the sort of 75 to 85 percentile range, sort of
Mhm.
depending whether you're using bench only, three lift, open, or all lifters, like whatever. But I'm sort of like floating in that range, right? And sometimes it can feel like you're just getting, you know, Jonathan Kaiko bench 230 for a triple or something the other day, and I'm like, fuck, man. However, like still being able to go, hey, look, I'm like, this is promising, like, and I'm good at this by some measures,
Yeah.
right? And so like I actually find that really reassuring, and I think a lot of other people will as well, to be able to go, hey, look, I'm better than half of all powerlifters in my weight class. Like, I'm strong. Like that, to me, that makes you categorically strong.
world. Not only that,
Absolutely.
um, not even just like in a sporting sense, to be a stronger human being, we're talking about powerlifters. In terms of the general population, when you enter, when you leave the front door, you are like a superhuman compared to the guy delivering whatever to your house. Like it's like just go smash some weights and you're probably far better off. Like this is you were being judged against strength athletes and you're probably on the top end. Now
Yep.
go even if you're on the bottom end, this is strength athletes. You're probably amongst the top 95 percentile of the universe of well, yeah, probably of the universe. But
They don't have this sport in many other planets, I don't think. Yep.
that's right. Exactly. So it makes it sound better. Let's just do it that way. But but anyways, you notice how much stronger you are like compared to the rest of the human race. You just walk out there and you're freaking super duper strong. And then just comparing against athletes in a strength sport, you might be in the 80th or 90th percentile. It really sheds light. You go to work on Monday, keep that in the back of your head, that all the people, period, like that you interact with. Yes, you're making gains. Yes, it's it's noticeable. It's a crazy improvement than where you used to be before you were lifting. Yeah, man,
Absolutely.
it's refreshing.
Can I give
It's
one cool resource that anyone listening might want to look at if they want to get this in more understandable terms, like relative to body weight strength? Definitely check out the strengthinitiative.com. This is a website and a calculator based upon that historical data that I was referencing and other data they have. And it's actually founded by a bunch of sports scientists who do a lot of analyses in powerlifting. So big shout out to Dr. Dan Vandenhoek, Dr. Christopher Latella. You'll see a lot of their first author on a lot of these powerlifting publications, and they've created a really cool calculator. It is basically strength norms for powerlifting, and you can
Oh,
enter your sex, your age, your body weight, and your 1RM for any of the lifts, and it'll give you your percentile ranking amongst powerlifters of the same age, sex, and weight class for you. And you can see how you compared to the historical data that I was talking about from 1968 to 2022. So I think that's pretty cool. And without like people like this, we wouldn't be able to have these conversations. Also, a big shout out to the Open Powerlifting team. Um, those are volunteers who are just categorizing all of this data. We wouldn't have this as a community if it wasn't for people who are doing things like that. So without Open Powerlifting, uh, we wouldn't have the Strength Initiative. And without the Strength Initiative, a lot of this is you looking at a Google sheet being like, what is this nerd talking about? And wanting to have that same quote that Ryan had last episode,
oh no, no, no,
famously.
no, no.
Yeah.
That was
So
no, no. I don't remember that. He's gonna pull that episode and do some quick editing. But I swear to God, Joey B, you were out of pocket, man. That's a friend of mine you're talking about. First off, you say that again, we're gonna have words, young man. Okay, that was off. Anyways, put a pin in that one. But fellas, this is a good freaking episode. I swear to God, no, we do have to do this again. We do have to, maybe not as extensive because now everyone's got the gist of it, but updating the outlier list. Let's please do update the outlier list and the three standard and 3.3 and 4. We'll see. And we'll do it after Worlds because I'm sure by Euros, PA Nats, and Worlds, and then we'll do a yearly recap. And let's do a look back. And we'll do a look back by the numbers. World records fallen, outliers. We'll do a nerdy recap of 2025 because no one else is doing it. People do the rewards, and we could do that. We'll do that. Fine, that's fun. But let's actually do a numbers one that's not even just opinion. It's just straight up stats for everybody. I think that'll be good too.
I'm
All
here to
right.
help you tank your ratings. If you want to start, going with nerd stuff, I'm here for it.
That's right. Perfect. Perfect. Gentlemen, I freaking appreciate the hell out of you. Thank you for coming on here. It had to be you two. And you guys are the dream team. You guys are the dream team, all right? Everybody listening, as per usual, please do subscribe, give us high ratings, and until next time, Pack Lapadat, six up, and we are out.